The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
One is done and the other is a long way from done. The Golden State Warriors on their way to the finals, sweeping the Portland Trail Blazers despite trailing by as many as 15 points in 3 of the 4 games. Could be a very different series about those Golden State runs they always put together. But who cares? We knew that one was coming somehow. 2-2. Milwaukee-Toronto, headed back to Milwaukee. What a weird series that's been. 2 blowouts, 2 tight ones. Overtimes in Game 3. Game 4, this was a cakewalk. We talked about it on yesterday's podcast with Neil. That was an opportunity to maybe get in on Toronto if you thought they had a chance to even it up. Neil was already in on Toronto at a slightly lower price, so he didn't do anything extra. Mentioned it on VSiN with Gil that Toronto had no shot to win this series if they don't win Game 4. So that holds on. If they win Game 5, I still don't think it's over. If Milwaukee wins Game 5, I mean, it's starting to look like it's going 7. That 2-2, man, you get those when no one takes a road game early. Anyway, I am Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. It's a Hoop Ball presentation. It's a Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee podcast as well, title sponsor of all of our audio-visual elements here at Hoop Ball. Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. I don't go with the Adrian Benjamin's line. Taste the Kona difference. That's not their official tagline. Actually, it's funny. I was talking to Glenn about it on a call a couple weeks ago. He said that's one we used a long time ago. So I don't know how either Adrian found it or he guessed it or what. Because the tagline right now for our buddies over at Hawaiian Isles is taste the warmth of aloha. I really think, I know I say it on every podcast, you got to just go to hawaiianisles.com. Hawaiian, I-S-L-E-S. Isles. Not like a supermarket. That's a different aisle. hawaiianisles.com. And just look at the pictures. And even if you don't end up wanting to drink coffee, you're probably going to end up buying a plane ticket to Hawaii. What a place. I went there as a kid a couple of times. My personal stuff on the podcast here. Whatever. It's the off season. You guys are stuck with me. My dad worked for a pharmaceutical company. I know you're like, a lot of you out there going, boo! Medical information scientist, professional nerd. And for a stretch of time, one of his territories was Hawaii, which is a pretty good gig to have. So when he'd had business trips there, he just used his frequent flyer miles, and I'm an only child, so my mom, myself, we'd just fly out. He'd go to meetings all day, and I'd camp out on the beach with my mother. Believe me, for a child, it could be worse. Probably could have been better. I was thinking, where are my friends? But I don't care. It was Hawaii. Much easier to appreciate when you're an adult. Wife and I went there about 3 years ago, I think. 4 years ago, perhaps. 3 or 4 years ago. And it was fantastic. We did the Kauai trip. Spent a couple nights on the north side of the island where it's cloudy, a little rainy, a little foliagey. And then a couple nights on the southern side of the island where it's sunny and beachy. It's pretty amazing. It's microclimates, basically. You got to go to Hawaii, get some Hawaiian Isles Kona coffee. Simple enough. I have a few thoughts that I didn't discuss with Neil on yesterday's podcast. I felt like it was going to take away from our discussion. Let me just line out what we're doing on today's show. Number one, you got me solo today. Brandon Marcus is in Italy this week. So, what a rough go. You should, by the way, feel incredible pity for Brandon. He can't do the podcast this week because he is stuck in the dumps of Italy. I hope the sarcasm comes through. Today's podcast, we got the New Orleans Pelicans. That's our post-mortem team du jour. Dmitry Semenov over at Hoop Ball. He's got the written piece that it will accompany today's podcast, breaking down the Pelicans from last year and what they're doing moving forward. That is going to be a very interesting discussion with a lot of question marks attached to it, because it's a team with not a ton of cap space, but a player that wants out, and the first pick overall in the upcoming draft. Pretty crazy. Other thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about Magic Johnson on today's pod. I know it's not fantasy relevant, but it could end up being because I don't know what this impact may be on potential free agents and what the Lakers' lure might be or may have been or will still be. And then a quick look as well at the betting. Quick look at betting. But, we sort of knocked that one out already. At Dan Besbris on Twitter, by the way. At HI Kona Coffee. At Hoopball Fantasy are the 3 Twitter handles. I haven't bugged you guys to do a podcast review in a while. If you're stuck with us here in the offseason, that means you're a serious degenerate. And so that means I can probably also ask you to take the time to please go review the show. Drop a 5-star rating on it if you like what you're listening to. If you have suggestions, you can just hit me with them. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. I'm not too proud to listen if they're well thought out. I mean, if you just want to come on and tell me I'm an idiot, I'm probably not going to read it. But if you have a thought on something we can do, simple things to improve the podcast experience, I'm not saying I'm going to do them all, but I'm more than willing to listen. It's how things get better. Not too proud to say that people have good ideas. I'm all about working smarter. Work smarter, not harder. Actually, you probably should work smarter and harder, but if you had to pick between the two, you can get a lot more done by working smarter. And people have good ideas. Those people are not all me. So please do that. Go rate and review the show. Subscribe if you haven't already. You probably have. And that's my begging for the day. I haven't done much of that lately, though. So you gotta give me that. The order of how I want to talk about things on today's show is not necessarily set in stone, but I think I just want to open with Magic because as a Laker guy, you guys know this about me, I very rarely draft Lakers. I think I'm a very pragmatic Laker fan when it comes to fantasy, but when I'm actually watching the games at the end of the night, provided my opponent doesn't have like 3 Lakers on his fantasy team, because for that week, I would probably just be okay with them going, 1-2 or something like that in low-scoring games. Or win a low-scoring game. Win a game, 96-89 or something like that. For the most part, though, I love to root for them when the games are actually on, and from a fantasy standpoint, I've largely dodged them because they've been kind of a rough go. Guys just haven't had great fantasy stat sets. Lonzo Ball with percentages issues, even though he's very good at some other stuff. He's a guy that has a very clear path to fantasy value. Brandon Ingram, he's got problems, no defensive stats, bad high-volume free throw shooting. All of Kuzma, poor percentages, no defensive stats, not much besides points and threes and a couple of rebounds. There hasn't been, there's obviously LeBron, but from a fantasy perspective, it's a team that I've largely avoided. From a fan perspective, it's a team I care about. And so, as someone that I'm an LA guy, I've been rooting for the Lakers a long time now, as someone who's been a massive fan of Magic Johnson for a long time, to see what he did on First Take was just kind of gross. And so I took a step back, and I listened to a little bit of LA talk radio when I'm in the car, which is briefly, mostly to and from preschool once or twice a day, depending on the schedule, to listen to what some of the local LA radio heads were discussing. And they largely agreed that it was not a good look for Magic. And I think I can get on board with that as well. The whole thing is a little bit blown out of proportion as well. And I'm trying to think of the right way to present this. It was a really bad look for Magic Johnson. And the complaint I had for fellow Laker fans, or just anybody that would listen to me that day, was Magic's so easy to like. All he had to do was just go back to tweeting inane crap like he did. Tweeted something about he was going to have sea salt on his light popcorn last night. And instead, he's out there just roasting the Lakers. Roasting Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka and Tim Harris and everybody that he could get his hands on, and Luke Walton. That was an ugly look for Magic. I love Magic, and he comes off as clearly the bad one here. I know there's a ton of gray area, but optics matter. And so right now, the Lakers look like they dodged a bullet. And I know he wasn't a great executive. He wasn't there, but he has power. He has brand power. He's probably a little bit of the reason that LeBron is in LA. I think Bron had made up his mind regardless, but to have someone that could basically mentor him in the marketing side of things, how to get himself involved in everything in Los Angeles, that's a pretty good guy to have around. And don't say he can just figure it all out himself, because it's always helpful to have somebody who's done it before. And so then he left, and in the moment it was like, well, this is crazy. Obviously, there's some stuff going on. But then, he basically was never around the team. Most of his personnel decisions were terrible. He copped to not bringing back Brook Lopez on a very cheap deal, which was just downright idiotic. Remains one of the most foolish moves that I could possibly imagine. A perfect fit around LeBron James. Perfect fit. Stretch 5 who can block shots at the defensive. I mean, don't even get me started on that stuff. So then he quits, and you're thinking, okay, Lakers are out from that mess. They're making their own mess now. And he comes back, and he just stirs it. And he looks like an ass. And it's brutal for someone who loves Magic to now have to look at this whole situation and say, geez, Rob Pelinka looks like the good guy. And that's not true. You know who comes out of this smelling like roses? Poor Frank Vogel. He's just slowly coasting along, saying reasonable things and staying out of the mess. On the other side of this, now, what does it mean? What happened? Magic did something stupid. I hope that he is aware of this. I don't think this is going to change much for what's going to happen to the Lakers on July 1st. I think whoever's coming is coming. I'm betting that almost everybody, maybe outside of Kawhi Leonard, because he's still obviously going to be a free agent. You're waiting to see how all this Toronto stuff shakes out. So maybe aside from Kawhi Leonard, I think I have a pretty good idea of I think these guys, I don't know, but I think the players themselves have a pretty good idea of where they're going. I don't think that they really care that Magic is on First Take blasting Rob Pelinka. Doesn't have much to do with what's going to happen once they're out there with LeBron and the young core and so on and so forth. I don't think the Lakers are getting Anthony Davis. It doesn't seem like that's happening. Although I would argue, and everybody's just like, Boston's package is way better. I don't know, man. Boston's guys didn't look that great. I've been lower on Jason Tatum for longer than just this year. So don't try to call me out on that one, because now everybody is super low on Jason Tatum, and they've swung too far because everybody has recency bias. After his first year, I said, I don't know. I don't see what you guys see. They said, but everybody told me, going to be one of the best players in the NBA. And I said, I don't know. He looks like sort of a better version of Otto Porter to me. That was what I got freshman year. And then there wasn't much of a change sophomore year. And now everybody's like, he's terrible. Guys, it's somewhere in the middle. And Jaylen Brown, how much better is he going to get? Probably a little bit better. And I love him because he's a Cal Bear, but is Terry Rozier a budding superstar? I don't know, man. I don't think that there's that big of a discrepancy between packages that teams can offer right now. I still don't think the Lakers are getting Anthony Davis, but I don't think it's this weird landslide that everybody's talking about. Do they trade for Bradley Beal? I think it comes down to what other free agents they get. I do think somebody's coming. It might be Jimmy Butler, because he ended up having to do more, I bet, than he expected in the postseason with Philly. It might be Kemba Walker. It might even still be Kyrie. I don't know. But I have a pretty good feeling the Lakers are going to get a center. Some center. Whether it's Lopez, who's, I believe, on just a one-year deal with Milwaukee. Maybe it's 2. Maybe he comes back. Maybe they offer him more. Maybe it's Boogie. Maybe it's Vooch. There's some centers out there that I'm thinking the Lakers will probably be able to go get. Whether or not they trade for someone's going to come down to whether they bring in a guard and then the center's on a cheaper deal, or does the center get a lot of money and then they trade for the guard? So it's May 21st, guys. Do you guys remember what happened in early April? The season was still going. Magic hadn't even done his weird resignation yet. So do you think anybody's going to remember this July 1st? Sure, we remember it now, but it happened a day and a half ago. So I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. Second thing on the docket for today, the New Orleans Pelicans. Let's get into the meat of today's show. We're going to get into the fantasy stuff now. Jrue Holiday, Anthony Davis, Solomon Hill, Etuan Moore. That might be it. Oh, Kenny Hustle. Darius Bertans. Do they pick up their team option on Frank Jackson? Jahlil Okafor is signed this coming year. They have a lot of money tied up, obviously, in those top few guys. Jrue Holiday's making $26 million. AD's making $27 million. Solomon Hill, $13 million. Etuan Moore, just $8.5 million. That's actually a pretty good deal for him. Julius Randle has a player option for $9 million. He may very well opt out of that. He looked good this year. He could probably, even if he opts out and signs a contract for the same annual value of around $9 million, I'm sure he could get another 2 or 3 year deal. So just extend it, basically. So I don't know that he's necessarily going to be back, especially if they're going in any kind of rebuild here. And then Zion, who I think is going to make something like 7 in his initial campaign. Let's assume that Anthony Davis is gone, which is not necessarily the correct assumption. He might still be a Pelican. I just don't know if he's going to be playing on opening day. One thing we know for certain, do we though? I guess one thing we probably know is that Jrue Holiday is likely going to still be there. Although I'm sure they could get a truckload for him. I feel like they want him around. He was so good for this team, and he's just a terrific basketball player. Last season, he played 67 ball games, down from 81 the year before that. Career high in scoring at 21 points per game. Career high in rebounding at 5. Career high in assists. Nope, excuse me. He was actually 0.3 below his career high in assists at 7.7. Tied his career high with 1.6 steals. Tied his career high with 0.8 blocks. What a season. What a season. Slightly down in free throw percent. Slightly down in field goal percent as his opportunities went up and he took more three-pointers this year. But it is hard to find fault with an all-around superb fantasy year like the one Jrue Holiday had. And, the injury stuff, the 67 games, it's always going to be in the back of your mind because he dealt with that stress fracture situation back in the 2013-14 window. But the last 3 years when he's been on the court, he's looked pretty healthy. And I think you should draft him expecting something like 70 to 72 games. That's a pretty safe number if they're not going into full tank mode. But they will be, right? That's the big if. So if you're drafting Jrue Holiday, you have to be ready for the fact that he might not play at the end of March and April. From a roto standpoint, you get your 65 to 70 games out of him. What does that actually mean? Well, he was number 21 in 9-cat per game, but he was actually about 10 slots lower than that by totals because of the low game count. 67 games is about 4 or 5 below, 4-ish, I think, below the average mark. So he took a slight hit. And so as much as I love Jrue Holiday, I don't think you can draft him expecting him to get to that 73, 74 games. What's the impetus? This is not a team that's going to be vying for a playoff spot, we think, next season. Zion's going to be cool, and Jrue is good, but if AD's gone, and it's a whole bunch of young guys that they bring in, that's a team that's not going to make the playoffs in the Western Conference. I mean, they didn't make it this year, and they weren't close. They hung in there for a little bit, but, not that long. We will know more when your fantasy draft comes around. I mean, maybe they figure things out with AD, and he decides to ride it out for one more year, and they make their playoff run or push with Zion on his rookie deal. I don't see it coming. He's reiterated that he wants to go. They should try to get something for him because the longer they hang on, the less value he has. His value diminishes with every passing week. By the trade deadline, a team trading for Anthony Davis might only have him for like 25 to 30 games total. 35, 40 if he plays in the postseason. That's not much. You're not going to give out the haul for that. Unless you think maybe it's going to win you a championship, but you'd have to give up so much. So I think he gets moved. I really do. I still think he gets moved. I believe that's the consensus right now. And if he gets moved, this is not a playoff team. And so when you look at veterans on a non-playoff team, you have to build that in a little bit. So, in summary, for the best player on the team likely next year, even though he finished as the number 21 guy on a per-game basis in 9-category leagues. I think you expect high 60s in games again next year. And so a top 20 per game is more like a top 26, 27 overall. And I think that's why he's a guy that should be drafted at the very end of the second round, beginning of the third. And I think there will be leagues where he falls that far. He'll probably go around 20. But maybe you get in a league where somebody doesn't like him and he falls 2 or 3 spots. And if you have an opportunity to get him at 24, 25, I think you do it in a roto league because you know when he's on the floor, he's going to be putting up massive numbers. In head-to-head, you really have to be careful. We don't know their schedule for next year, whether they're going to have a good playoff schedule or not. You might be able to move him mid-season to someone who's maybe a little bit less afraid of a shutdown. So you can't wipe him off the board altogether, but I do think that you have to build in a little bit of a hit in the head-to-head realm versus roto. Do we talk about Anthony Davis? I guess we have to. Number 1 guy in 9-cat when he was on the floor, but he missed a ton of ball games, so only 56 games under his belt. Number 1 on a per-game basis, number 11 by totals, which, by the way, is crazy to think that this dude missed a third of the season and he was still a first-round valuation. But, I mean, listen. James Harden was nipping at his heels. They were basically a dead heat. Harden was like 100th of a value point below AD. And then there was, again, a very strong drop-off to Paul George, Steph Curry, Kawhi Leonard, Kat, KD, guys like that. They were all a click below Davis and Harden this year. But it is pretty crazy to think that come totals time, Anthony Davis still somehow ranks inside the top 12. That's nuts. That's how far ahead he was of a lot of guys that he could miss that many games and still have that kind of value. I'm not worried about him all that much. I mean, clearly we're going to have to wait and see where he ends up, if anywhere, before you gauge his value. But he's still quite clearly a top 3 fantasy pick, anywhere you put him. Because very few guys in the NBA can do what he does. And what he does is average 4 combined defensive stats per game. 4. Not 3, not 3.5. 4. There's almost nobody in the NBA that comes close. Harden was at 2.9. Giannis was at 2.8. Rob Covington was at 3.4. Drummond was at 3.4. I mean, we're talking about some pretty remarkable stuff. Let's see. Anybody else even remotely close? Not really. Not really. Steven Adams, 2.5. I mean, there's only a handful of guys that actually crack the 3 mark on an annual basis. And AD was at 4. And that's why he's basically untouchable when you look at this stuff. That's why he's always going to be in that crazy elite crowd. He almost doesn't need to do anything else to be a top 25 guy. You just go 1.6 steals and 2.4 blocks a game and zeros everywhere else, and you're probably worth drafting in the first 4 rounds. But on top of that, he averaged 26 points, 12 boards, a three-pointer on 52% from the field and 79% at the free throw line with only 2 turnovers a game. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic year. It's fantastic 2 years in a row. He was at 4.1, by the way, combined steals and blocks last year. And 28 points. His scoring actually came down a tiny bit this season. There's just no way to complain. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. And you can put him on another team. And the best part about AD on another team is that wherever he gets traded, it's going to be somebody trying to win. And so he'll get his customary rest days, and he'll do his locker room trips to go poo in the second quarter. But he's playing down the stretch outside of a crazy turn of events. You know, if he goes to Boston or New York or LA, or these teams are, anybody that trades for Anthony Davis is going to be trying to win a championship. And so that means that they're going to have somewhat meaningful games. And sure, they might have their playoff position locked up by April 5th, and maybe he only plays one of the final 3 games. But AD's sitting out 2 or 3 games the last 2 or 3 weeks is a lot different than him sitting out all of the games the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so I actually feel pretty good about drafting him first overall again, regardless of where he goes. Maybe you go Harden first. He's just so safe. But AD's number 2, easy. Even in this terrible year, I mean, okay, head-to-head, he killed you. But again, you got top 12 production from this guy in a brutal year where he demanded a trade and sat out a month and a half, effectively. He was probable and never played. Which was, as the Pels just messing with him. So maybe he falls a little bit. I doubt it. I'd be pretty surprised if he fell outside the top 3. Right? Who on earth would take someone else? You could argue in a 9-category format, you could see James Harden. Maybe somebody gets crazy and goes Cat. Maybe somebody else gets crazy and goes Giannis. It's not going to be Steph. It's not going to be KD. I mean, maybe it's Steph. Maybe it is KD if he gets traded to a team where it's not the Warriors. So I guess there's a weird world where Kevin Durant is a Knick and Steph is a Warrior, and he gets to take all of his extra shots with KD gone. And Kawhi, maybe he's starting a thing. I mean, there's a weird world where so many people were soured on AD that I guess he could fall as far as like 5. I'd still be pretty surprised. I think he's probably going second or third in almost every fantasy draft this coming year. And I condone it because he's a beast and he's not going to rest if he gets traded. They're going to want him to play. Other notable players on the New Orleans Pelicans, Julius Randle. He played 73 games this year, was ranked inside the top 80, which is about where he was expected to go. He's pre-ranked 72. He finished at 76. He was right around that by totals as well because he played 73 games. 21.5 points, 8.7 rebounds, 3 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.6 blocks, 2.8 turnovers, a very high volume, 73% of the foul line, which did hurt a little bit. But overall, just a nice, solid year across the board. For a guy that probably got drafted in the 6th, 7th round, you got your value. And I don't know that there are that many places he could go where he's going to do that much again. So I think Julius Randle is a candidate to be slightly overvalued for this coming season. Maybe he comes back to New Orleans. That's actually a best-case scenario. It's Holiday, Randle, and Zion. And so Julius will get his 15 shots a game again. And you'll basically see a repeat because I don't think the steals and blocks are ever going to show up. Points, rebounds, assists, they're always going to be there. Field goal percent is going to be good. Free throws not going to be that great. 3-pointers are going to be about this. It is what it is. This is the best case scenario. It's top 75. I don't think he's clearing that hurdle anytime soon unless his free throw number jumps to 75 or 76. And then you'd look at a top 60 guy. But I'm not banking on that. So I don't think I end up with a ton of Julius Randles this coming year. But I can understand why you might. It's a pretty safe pick around that part, depending on your team build in particular. Elfrid Payton sucks. Sorry, guys. I said that before in this podcast. I don't like his game. I know he had that stretch of triple-doubles, but literally everybody else had to be out of the lineup for it to happen. He's not signed, so I don't know where he's going to end up, but it's probably not going to be a place that gives him as much freedom as New Orleans would have. And so him I'm not interested in. He's just not my kind of guy. He was top 140 in 30 minutes a game on this team. I mean, I don't know how. If you can't do it with the Pels who play no defense and just run, it's not happening anywhere. Each one more, not that interested. He's exclusively a high field goal percentage shooter. Kenny Hustle, not interested. And I'm not really looking at guys like Chick Diallo and Jahlil Okafor either. I'm not looking at Christian Wood, Darius Miller, all these guys. I don't care because Zion's going to come in and he's going to take a massive load. I think they'll play Julius Randle at center for long stretches. You'll probably see Julius and Zion in the front court. I don't know what the hell they're going to do at small forward. And then you'll see Jrue and either point guard or shooting guard and Jrue, depending on how they line it up in the backcourt. But those 4th and 5th guys are going to be very hard-pressed to find fantasy value. Until the last 15 games when, they go into full tank mode. We will, of course, reassess when we know more about what the Pelicans are doing this coming year. Who comes back in an Anthony Davis trade? I mean, what if they get Jason Tatum? Hell yeah, you draft him. That could be a whopper of a year. What if they get Lonzo Ball? Yeah, I think I'd give him a look. Get out from under LeBron's shadow. I'm actually very pro Lonzo. Not necessarily from a fantasy perspective, but his ceiling is crazy high if he can stay healthy and if he can start to get a few shots to drop, because he's a guard that rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks shots, which is sweet. Brandon Ingram, I don't like his fantasy game. Lonzo's that guy that if he gets traded, he's got the interesting one. I mean, what if Mitchell Robinson comes over from the Knicks? He's the starting center. They go Julius at the 4, they play Zion at the 3. Hell yeah, I'd draft him then. As with a lot of situations, though, I'm always worried about how early guys get drafted. It's why it's nice to look at guys that maybe had a little bit of a down year, like AD, but those other guys don't really exist on this Pelicans team because they're a stat factory. Jrue Holiday, pretty safe at the second round turn, 24-25. I don't think he'll fall that far. Julius Randle, pretty safe around 75. I don't think he'll fall that far. And AD, if you can get him anywhere beyond number 2, I think he's going to be a great value. Which seems crazy, by the way. If you draft Anthony Davis 3rd and he ends up as the number 1 guy, that's like getting an extra second round pick. The difference in that value between 3 and 1. Final thoughts today in this podcast is going to be about that Bucks and Raptors series. I don't know, Hornets. They're not doing anything. Bucks and Raptors headed back to Milwaukee. Golden State sitting back and getting healthy. We have no idea who's going to play for them in the finals. I still think Milwaukee's going to win the series. The narrative has changed now after a big Toronto blowout. This is a really cool time if you're interested in the Milwaukee Bucks. This would be a very interesting time to get down on it because people are doubting them after they played a not great game. I mean, this is one of those ones where everything went in for Toronto. The bench had a big game. Make your shots, miss your shots. That's the nature of the beast. They had 14 3-pointers. They made their free throws. That was actually one of the big differences in the ball game. Teams basically tied in free throw attempts. Raptors shot 27. Bucks shot 26, but one team got about an extra 6 or 7 points to the foul line. Still, it would have been a Toronto sizable advantage. But these little things add up. A weird ball game. If you looked at everything except the actual score, you'd think it was relatively close. And somehow it just wasn't. A few extra possessions on that Toronto side went a long way. But Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, Serge Ibaka, Freddie VanVleet, Norman Powell, all these guys played well, and it's probably not going to happen that way on the road. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. I still like Milwaukee, and now I feel better about it because they were not priced well when people started to buy in on them being really, really good. And then everybody can change their mind pretty fast. You know what would be nice, though, for Milwaukee is if Eric Bledsoe could remember how to play basketball. He's been horrible in the postseason. Truly awful. That'll about do it for us on this Wednesday show. I got through my stuff. I got nothing else. Tomorrow, Neil Rochlani will host a podcast. Friday, Adrian Benjamins will host a podcast. He'll be joined by Coach. I don't actually know who's with Neil tomorrow, but they'll be breaking down the Grizz. The Grizz, who also have a nice pick in the upcoming fantasy draft. The Timberwolves. That'll be getting covered on Friday's show. As post-mortem season continues here at Hoopball. Again, Dimitri, our guy Mr. Semenov, he's got the written piece coming out at Hoopball in conjunction with this episode on the New Orleans Pelicans. We will reassess after free agency and any potential Anthony Davis trade, but those are my thoughts right now on how things went and how things may go in the future. Just trying to plan ahead. I am Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. I'm done for the week. The show is not, which is cool. The show continues to roll forward, and I get to hop on at the next station. That's on Monday. I'll be back on Monday. Ethan Norif and I will be breaking down the Lakers on that one. That should be a fun one. But again, you got the Grizz and the Wolves coming up the next 2 days. Have a lovely Thursday and Friday. And, of course, have a wonderful tonight, Wednesday. I'm Dan Besbris for Fantasy NBA Today, a Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee and Hoopball presentation. So long.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.